Now, what can we do? I'm just going to give you one concrete suggestion. It's going to be a positive suggestion, and it's meant to open your minds. It's not meant to solve the problem. Okay. What I think we have to do, again, we need a new approach, and what that means is take this whole thing apart into individual pieces. Don't try to throw everything into a single agreement that does everything. The consequence is you have an agreement that doesn't do anything, or almost nothing. So let's take it apart into pieces. There's been one good piece of news in the last 20 years, at least for me, and that is an effort by the United States, Canada, and Mexico, and other countries, including the Solomon Islands, have also supported this idea, to have an amendment to the Montreal Protocol, which is the agreement on the ozone layer, to include HFCs. Hydrofluorocarbons are one of the greenhouse gases included under the Kyoto Protocol, and the Montreal Protocol addresses chemicals that look like HFCs but are different because the chemicals under the Montreal Protocol destroy the ozone layer and HFCs do not. However, because the commercial properties of HFCs are the same, if you were to amend the Montreal Protocol, that agreement, in contrast to Kyoto, is beautifully written, works exquisitely, and I'm quite confident it would be effective. Why is that? I'll just mention two reasons. One is it is enforced, and it's enforced through trade restrictions. Now, you might say we should use trade restrictions on everything. We can have a discussion about that. I think that's not so simple. But these trade restrictions work. In fact, they work so incredibly well they're never applied. So I want you to think about that. The reason for the trade restrictions is not to restrict trade. The reason for the trade restrictions is to deter countries from staying outside the agreement and not complying. And the reason they're deterred is they know that if they did stay out or they did not comply, they would be subject to the trade restrictions. That is the perfect enforcement instrument. Okay, so that is one thing we can do. From there, I think we can do a lot more things like that, breaking this problem up into little pieces. But one last advantage I'll mention of this is if you have problems in any one piece, it doesn't hold back everything else. The way we're going now is the opposite. If you have problems somewhere, it holds back everything. The last thing I want to say is, again, we've been building up, we've been failing for a long, long time, despite our efforts. We've been building up, meanwhile, the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. As you probably know, going back to the Framework Convention, there's a concern not just that this could bring about some gradual warming over a period of time, but that it could trigger instabilities in key geophysical systems. Think about the polar ice caps, monsoons, things like that. I think that we're definitely heading towards a world where this is extremely likely to happen. So what does that mean? That means we're going to have a crisis. Now, I said earlier that our institutions were never suited to deal with this problem, but if you look over the history of international relations, they weren't suited to deal with a lot of problems. And what happened was, the reason they change very often is because of crisis. So think about the key institutions today, the United Nations, the World Trading System, and so on and so forth. Where did they come from? They came from crisis. So this would be my guess of where we're moving in the future. Failure to act now in a proper way is going to trigger probably dramatic changes in climate systems. That will itself trigger changes in our institutions. We will be willing to do things in this new world that we so far have been unwilling to do. You see that very recently, by the way, over the euro, where the members of the euro have now agreed to do things that they never would have agreed to do years before, in anticipation of future problems. And it's because they're in a crisis. So this is where I see things heading. I know it's not the rosiest of pictures, but that's where I see things heading.